you, Ashley and Joe and Diane, our worship team this morning, and good morning and welcome to all of those of you who are joining us online today. I have a story to tell you. It was kind of an overcast day when we arrived in Dublin, Ireland at about 10 o'clock in the morning. And this was back in 2008. And we got on the bus, and our very first stop was the ancient monastery of Glendalough. Glendalough is a wonderful, you just feel, when you walk on the grounds, you feel you're in sacred space. And it was autumn, and the trees were all filled with color, a little misty rain, but that's Ireland. And I was reminded of being there this morning in one of my spiritual readings, and I thought, oh, of course, the story of St. Kevin. How perfect for today and our topic of prayer. St. Kevin lived many, many years ago, and he established the monastery there in Glendalough. And one day, in ecstatic prayer, he had his arms to heaven and his hands open wide. And while he was praying in ecstasy, as they call it, a little bird decided that that was a safe place for her. And she began to build her nest in his hand. And by the time Kevin sort of awakened from his spiritual ecstasy, he realized that the tiny little bird had not only built a nest, but she laid 3 little blue eggs. And she looked at him. You know how animals look at you? Like, am I going to be okay? Would you protect me, please? And so Kevin made an agreement that he would hold the nest and the bird and her eggs until they had hatched. Time passed, and one day he recognized that the bird that normally sang to him in the morning, and he would preach to the bird in the afternoon, it was a perfect match, that she was a little agitated and fussing in her nest, when all of a sudden he heard the sound. The babies had been born. And as we all know, the minute babies are born in the human kingdom, in the animal kingdom, they are hungry. So Mom, in effect, said to Kevin, take care of everything, I'm leaving to go find food. And here's poor Kevin thinking that, wow, the birds are hatched, now I'm done. I can release the nest and off they go. But do you realize birds, when they're first born, this is true of butterflies, bees, and they cannot fly. And so here's Kevin with 3 little hungry birds that are waiting for Mama's return. She comes back, fills their beaks, and slowly but surely as the days progressed, as their wings came out, as they began to dry off, and one morning she waved goodbye and off she flew. There's another story just like this. We can find it in the book of Genesis. It's a story about Noah. You know, the story about Noah is that he was, of course, the man in the flood. And when the ark finally came to rest on Mount Ararat, what does he do? He kind of opens the little window. He can't see too much. He just knows that they've stopped moving. They've hit a mountain. And he sends out the dove, and the dove comes back with an olive leaf in her beak. But when he opens the door, he's shocked to see that they still cannot get out. The earth is covered by water, and the wait is a little bit longer. And maybe the words of our contemporary songwriter, one of our contemporary songwriters, Kenny Loggins, who said, wait a little while to welcome what you're after. Give it the chance to find its way to you. As soon as you no longer try, you turn, and there it's standing by your side. When you let it, it'll come to you. And isn't this the art and the essence of prayer? All throughout the month of August, we have been talking about prayer. And we could talk about prayer for the next 20 years and never get tired of it. It's so multifaceted. We could talk about prayer in terms of prayers of gratitude and forgiveness and supplication. We could talk about all kinds of facets of prayer. But we're looking at sort of a way of prayer before we get to prayer. As St. Porphyrius said, who is a Greek a saint of the 20th century, he says you have to pray in order to pray. You have to get ready. And we've been talking about getting ready to pray. and how it is that we have to change our mindset and that we have to change the way we think about prayer. Because all of us, no matter who we are, how spiritually ascended we may be, over the course of time, when we do anything over and over again, we begin to lose connection. We begin to have it go stale. When we wanted it to be a dynamic and fulfilling prayer life, somehow it's just rote and ritual to what we do. And so we've been trying to unpack this and say, I think, and I'm speaking definitely for myself, that I became painfully aware that my prayer life had just become, hey, God, listen up. This is what I got to do, and I'm in a hurry. Could you answer my prayer? And I'm done. And to really sort of step back and say, well, now, wait a minute. Is that really the essence of prayer? And to find that, there's nothing wrong with those kinds of prayers. I don't mean that. But it's all about me telling God what God needs to do for me, instead of me listening and to engaging the Almighty and say, God, what do you want of me? So in this journey, we've been looking at setting our foundation, and last week we began to talk about what is that foundation. And we said that any good relationship, any relationship that's worth keeping, a human relationship or a spiritual relationship, we must learn to be better listeners. We must learn to be better listeners. I don't know about you, but, we're good talkers. We're up here a lot of the time. But to listen, and to listen with all. When we engage people, we're not just listening to the words they say, but we're embracing the feelings. We look and see how they are, how their energy is. Are there tears in their eyes? We see a wholeness of our friend and our relationship. And if we're going to truly engage it, we want to engage it with all. Scripture repeats over and over again that we must love God with all. Therefore, when we go to prayer, when we stop and say, I want to take this time and be sacred, instead of saying, listen up, God, it's more like, listen up, Marianne. You need to listen to the dialogue within. Because what we know about prayer, and what I'm not necessarily talking about meditation or contemplation or the rosary or any other kinds of prayers you might do. I'm talking about where we are developing this relationship on this really deep level. And here's what's so important for us to remember, that this relationship is a loving relationship. God so loved us. God so loved us that he created us in his image and his likeness. And what is the image and likeness of God if it's not love? God so loved, not a Hollywood love, not a love of feeling and emotion, but of power and of intention, of intelligence, and all the wholeness that love really is. And this is the gift God has given each and every one of us. This is called the gift of life. The challenge for all of us is that in our human self, we tend to forget that God so loved us. See, it doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter what you've failed to do. The love of God can never be subtracted. And we used the example last Sunday of creation of any sort of art. Our children were making mosaics a couple weeks ago. And they will never stop loving that which they have created. You will never stop loving that which you have created. A painting, a poem, a contract, anything. You love it because it came from you. And if you think in such a limited, small, minuscule way that how much you love that object, think of how much more God loves you. Think of how much more. It's inconceivable, actually, for us to understand the great mystery of love. So I was talking about how we want to be the best version of ourselves, and I want to make sure we all understand. I am not saying that you lack something. You're not the best version of yourself because you're not you haven't done this, that, or the other thing. That's not what I'm talking about. When I'm talking about the best version of yourself, I'm talking about the self that God sees. Our relationship to God is revelatory. In other words, God is giving to you, as you pray, as you open up, as you discover, as you explore, more of what it is that you already are. You were already created a whole package. You were already created total and complete. And now, as situations and circumstances go through your life, what's happening is God is saying, in this crisis, here's a gift. In this challenge, here is grace. In this understanding, celebration, you learn strength. In this difficult time, you've learned to seek the depths of your soul and your being. And each time that happens, you have a greater understanding and an appreciation and awareness of yourself. And you cannot move through the world by subtraction. Once you have a revelation of your greater self, you can't say, well, I'm going to ignore that. You can't ignore it. Because it's now become part of you. It's become into your awareness in its fullness and its completeness. But here's the little disclaimer. You will never get more until you use what you've been given. You will never get more of the best version of yourself until you live into the best version of yourself that you can possibly know and understand at this moment. And sometimes that means being polite to the gas station attendant. Sometimes, I was at Reese's the other day and I was thinking of this, and this machine and I were not agreeing with each other. It was not scanning my codes. And I thought, Marianne, it's about love. Okay, there's not an object, there's not a person, it's a machine. But you know what? I want my energy out into the world to be loving, not as it was in that moment at Reese's. I want it to be loving. So I really had to stop, and I'd say, Marianne, get a hold of yourself. It's just the machine. Take a breath, scan it left to right, and it worked perfectly. Isn't that amazing? But we do that, don't we? We forget that all of life is energy and flow. And as a result of energy and flow, that means that we are always engaged in this relationship to God. And our object of our prayer life really then, at the core level, is to build that relationship, is to strengthen that relationship, is to listen for the voice of God speaking within us. And as we said last Sunday, God doesn't speak to you in words. And this is really interesting. It's only happened to me, quite honestly, a very few times. But I became painfully and poignantly aware of what happened. There was a moment that I was standing and I was praying about something, and there was this peace that passes all understanding. And then the words, God is vibration. But you and I are language-based vibration. Therefore, to just say, oh, I'm vibrating, doesn't really inform you of anything. And slowly but surely, your mind and your being begins to put a language around that voice. I want to caution you, because sometimes what happens is people say, I didn't hear anything, it must not be God. No, we have to learn to cultivate understanding and hearing the voice. We have to learn the difference between all the yama that goes on in our head and that which goes on in the very gut and base of our soul. So I can give you a few tips on that. Number one, God does not speak to you in Excel spreadsheets, paragraphs, books. God speaks to you in short, pithy words. That idea that God is speaking to you is the after effect of the vibration of the energy. So in other words, you're going to turn on a light bulb, you start by turning the switch, right? It's the switch, it's the vibration, it sets the vibration in motion, and then you experience the light. So the same is true with God. We get this vibration of love that is moving in and through us, we call it a prayer. This is what I'm praying about. This is who I'm praying for. This is what I'm trying to understand in the building of my relationship. And in the moment as the love begins to open and flow, there's an incredible amount of peace, and it's instantaneous and it's momentary because you and I only know how to grab onto it when it gets words. Discerning is a very important part of our relationship to God. Discerning is very important in our human relationships because you know and I know, we meet someone, we think we like them, they seem like nice people, but what do we do in the early stages of a relationship? I mean, a casual relationship, a loving, it doesn't matter what kind. We begin to say, I wonder if they're telling me the truth. Their body language doesn't, they're a little different than I thought. Are they really true? And so we go through a kind of a checklist to see, is this person really right on? Can I trust them? Are they good people? What they say is one thing, and then what they do might often be another time. So the same is true with God. We need to work hard to listen for that still small voice that is vibration and movement and flow that we then eventually give words to. God doesn't speak to us in long words, and God doesn't speak to us in the head. If you have a sense of God speaking to you in the head, then it's probably you speaking to God in the head. Because God is vibration, God is love, and that vibration and that love are in the heart. Therefore, we're going to feel it in the solar plexus, in the wisdom center of our being. We are going to feel a resonance. We're going to feel, we even sometimes see a word come up in the really depth of our being. That's why often dreams are so powerful, is because we've let go of our conscious mind so that what is really trying to be said can get through our belief systems. It's important that we spend time in any relationship discerning with wisdom what people are telling us, who they are. Are they authentic? Are they honest? Are they in integrity? And conversely, are we being the same for them? To discern what God is saying is difficult. Sometimes it's not clear. And those are the frustrating times, aren't they? Because we want to have God be clear. Okay, I have a prayer request. I need some guidance here. God, this is the plan. Here's what I need, and here's when I need it by. And here's what needs to happen in between time if you would really, make all that happen by tomorrow morning would be fine. So we all know, we can laugh because we all do it. And yet the reality is God's time is not our time. And God works on a different wavelength. God doesn't want you to be better because you have started a program of betterness. God says, I want you to embrace your betterness. Something that I have is a gift for you. I want you to open up and be aware. But the challenging thing is, as we try to discern the voice of God, it is an art, it is a practice, it is something we must do. There are times when we hear nothing. It's like, woohoo, God, this is a really important prayer and I hear nothing. And it's at that point in time that we learn the next step in relationship building, isn't it? It's called trust. So I'm going to share with you a story. Some of you may have heard this story before. It happened back in December of 2007, and here was the question. Should I accept the job in Tulsa, Oklahoma? And I went to a retreat center that was not too far from our home, and I was there for like 4 days. And I was like, God, am I supposed to take this church in Oklahoma? I don't hear anything. I am not hearing nothing from Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I'm just really, really stressed out about it. This was a big move. We lived in California. It would be selling our house, moving our whole life to move. So I am like praying and praying, sweat running down the brow and everything. And Patrick says, why don't you go to the retreat center and, kind of go away for a while so I can pray without you, So I go over to this retreat center, and I told the woman when I walked in I wanted to be in silence, and she said, fine, just, And I had been there before, so I kind of knew the drill. And at the dinner table, unlike the retreat center I just came from, there was no community dining. You just went off into your own table in your own space, and you did not have to converse with anyone. So I'm sitting there, it's a buffet line, and I see this woman bring her tray over, and it's cold, it's December in California, and she's got a sweatshirt on. And I thought, what does that sweatshirt say? And she put her tray down, and she stood upright, and it said, Oklahoma. Really? So she sat there and she was eating, and I thought, I can't stand it. I've got to go talk to this woman. So I kind of walked over to her and I said, excuse me, I know you're on retreat and I don't mean to interfere, but are you from Oklahoma? Hoping that she would say, don't ever move there. That would be my sign. It would be my answer. Yay! She said, actually, no. I was born and raised in the Bay Area. I thought, you are no help. And she said, I have a friend who lives in Oklahoma, and they decided to give me this, sweatshirt, thought it'd be fun. Oh, okay. And she said, why do you ask? And I said, well, I'm here to pray about moving to Oklahoma. And she pulls her T-shirt out, and she goes, it's a sign. The next 3 days, every time I looked, I saw that woman. And she'd grab her T-shirt, and she'd go, it's a sign. I was like, get away from me. I'm walking the labyrinth, my eyes are closed, I look up, there she is, right in front of me, Oklahoma. It's like, okay. So I'm like, God, I still don't have an answer. Really? And it was so interesting to me because I wanted to feel something inside. I wanted that certainty that what we were about to do and where we were about to go was going to be okay, no pun intended. And, it was just, it's like, how do I go into this? I'm scared, I'm frightened, I don't know if I can do it, but, okay, I'm kind of moving in that direction. And sometimes in our spiritual journey, that's exactly what we have to do. We have to move in the direction. Move in the direction. Listening, working, listening, working. Because sometimes what happens in the moving to the direction, the door closes. And when the door closes, that's not the direction to go. And I kept walking in that way, walking forward, and I kept saying, oh, another door open, another door open, another door open, and then we were here. And it's important for you to understand, even as funny as it appears to me now, all these years later, I think, what was I so worried about? But it was a huge change in our life on so many levels. And to feel the weight of that responsibility, because it wasn't like I was coming alone. I said, hey, Patrick, we're going to pick up our whole house and we're going to go, won't that be fun? And that's not exactly what he said. But, he was generous about that. And so here we are, and this is our life and we love it here. But there's a risk involved here, isn't there? Is to listen deeply, to listen closely. Building that relationship with God is so critically important. Because in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't the biggest decision maybe I'll ever make in life. It seemed pretty big at the time. But I want to know and have the belief that I've created a foundation of my spiritual life where I have a relationship to God. And what I realized over this time of sabbatical was that I struggled recognizing that I had let that go from my number one priority. And now as I have said it, over these last couple weeks and reaffirmed it to myself, it's like, Marianne, you got to get back on track here. You got to say to yourself every morning when you hit that alarm, I put God first. And every time that you walk out that door and heading toward your prayer room, you say, God is already there waiting for me. Everything I need, everything I pray about is already accomplished in spirit, and all I have to do is walk into it with gratitude and thanksgiving and my heart open. It requires of me that I'm willing to struggle with the things that are my shadow side and the things that aren't, my highest and best version of myself. And to be willing to sit in that chair day after day and say, you know what? What I really, really want with my whole heart and my whole being is to build that relationship. To have that relationship be strong, vital, and dynamic in my life, no matter what is happening in and through a human existence. And so I invite you, as we've talked about prayer, to kind of do a system check for yourself. How is your prayer life? Has it kind of gone down the way? Have you sort of lost trust in God because things didn't turn out the way you thought they should, and it was so clear that they should have turned out that way? Or have you begun to reestablish the connection? The other morning I thought to myself, the good news, God never left the relationship. God was always here waiting for me. And the message I have for you today, regardless of where you are at in your prayer journey, God is waiting for you. God is waiting in love. God is waiting in wholeness. God is waiting in joy. God is waiting in peace. And the invitation is simply to come and enter the relationship and engage like Kevin did, to hold and wait, like Noah did, to wait until the rain cleared. And like Kenny Loggins said, wait a little while and it will come. The relationship building is a part of our journey, a very, very essential part of our spiritual journey. Thank you for joining me today, and God bless.